Yes, guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to this afternoon's live stream. And we've got a packed show for you as always. There's plenty going on, the latest on the pursuit of Wesley Fofana and also Frenkie de Jong, as well as the future of Callum Hudson-Odoi and many, many more. And I'm delighted to be joined by journalist Rob Pratley. Rob, thanks so much for joining me. Welcome to the channel. Hope you're well, mate. It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's get right into it then. Chelsea's pursuit of Leicester City defender Wesley Fofana. Obviously, it's going to be expensive. Leicester wanting around a similar fee to what they got for Harry Maguire, maybe even a little bit more. Chelsea have put a couple of bids in, both been rejected. Understood that they're preparing a third offer. Not sure if that's going to meet the asking price or not. But you know, is there growing confidence, Rob, on a Chelsea side that a deal is getting close and is more of a possibility than it was, say, a few weeks ago?
I think certainly there's more confidence that a deal is possible. I think what it really is worth sort of noting is that Fofana, the interest is not new. It's been there for a long time. And Chelsea, I think, would have acted on it earlier if he hadn't signed that new deal. When he signed that new deal, it was literally just after he'd come back from that quite nasty injury. And I think the club were maybe perhaps a bit more risk averse at the time because it was under the previous ownership. If it had been under the current ownership, we might have seen, and it'd been inside a window, maybe we'd have seen something be attempted even if he hadn't played him any minutes. Now, again, he's had a very interest in him from when he was at Saint-Etienne, and the interest has continued while he's at Leicester. If he'd have been available this summer, like clearly, I think he would have been very high up the list and higher than some of the other names that were. The feeling was always that he wasn't going to be available, but the situation has now sort of shifted that Chelsea have put the money in and suddenly there seems to be a willingness, certainly on the players' side, for the conversation to happen. I did note today that you're starting to see some briefs by Leicester City coming out in the press. I think The Athletic did one about an hour ago through one of their journalists. And usually when you get clubs briefing that a deal isn't close, etc., it's usually the exact opposite. We saw it last week with the Marc Cucurella sort of transfer. You usually sort of see that. I was told by someone who I consider to be a very good source that a third bid is imminent. It's possibly, coming. It's possibly already in. It's coming today. It's sort of coming very soon. And they were certainly of the belief that it would be significant enough to get Leicester City to agree. Leicester want quite a lot for the player. It's been sort of disclosed. We know it's a fee of around £80 million to get something done. But at the same time, it is worth sort of noting, I think, that Leicester themselves want to come out of it as if they've had a deal they absolutely couldn't turn down. And they also want to be able to paint it in a picture, we got the most money we can for a player. So the first couple of bids, I don't think were ever going to be accepted. The big caveat, I think, from Chelsea's point of view, is they're waiting to see if Fofana does more to force the move. Now, obviously, he's been quite open on social media about his sort of preference to it. And I understand behind the scenes he's made it, privately clear that he's interested in it. However, he's not publicly done anything like handing the transfer request like Marc Cucurella did. And obviously, if that happens, that sort of changes the negotiation positions because that makes it a lot easier to negotiate. So it'll be interesting to see if that does force his hand, particularly if the bid, the third bid isn't successful.
And in terms of kind of the offer for Fofana, it's there's been murmurings about potential players being involved, but that's kind of gone a little bit quiet. The likes of Loftus-Cheek, Matt Law come out a couple of weeks ago or last week saying that Loftus-Cheek got no intention of leaving. Obviously, Levi Colwill was the obvious one, but he's obviously gone to Brighton on loan for the season. Callum Hudson-Odoi is another one, but again, Leicester will probably be looking for a replacement for Fofana. So any players involved, you'd rather think they'd be defenders. So as far as you're aware, it is purely going to be a cash-only transaction.
Yeah, I can't really. I tend to sort of say to people, I don't normally see things being broke into the case that you rarely ever see deals sort of being combined with one another. It's mainly because it's very, very hard to do swap deals and hard to do part exchanges because there's a lot that rides on it. There's a lot that relies on it. It's usually almost always separate deals. And I think you've seen that quite a lot this summer. There have been suggestions that players might be involved in part exchange with so-and-so. There may have been players involved in deals for Marc Cucurella. Obviously, with that, there ended up being a separate deal anyway for Levi Colwill. It was always going to be a very separate deal. They weren't going to be interchanged and sort of tacked onto each other.
Yeah, no, for sure. And on Fofana, Rob, do you envisage this going sort of right down to the end of the window? I know we've still got about 3-4 weeks, etc. It'll be obviously in both clubs' interest to get it done as soon as possible. Chelsea desperate for a centre-back and Leicester will want suitable amount of time to get a replacement in if they agree to the sale. So, I mean, do you see this coming to a fairly swift conclusion, or do you think it's got a few more weeks in it to go still?
I don't know. I think another bid, once it comes in, obviously it goes harder and harder once the money starts to go up and up. But I think, from Leicester's point of view, Brendan Rodgers obviously saying publicly he doesn't want him to be sold. I tend to ignore what managers say in that regard, because it tends to sort of be what the manager wants isn't always what the board want. But I still, I do think at this moment in time, it's possibly worth saying that I don't necessarily think it's going to be a swift conclusion, as per se. Someone talked about the PSG joining the race for Fofana. They do have a long-term interest in the player, but their interest was mainly in Milan Skriniar. And I understand their valuation for Fofana, at starting valuation is about 25 to 30 million pound down from what Chelsea have been quoted and what they want to pay. So I think, unless PSG change their stance significantly, I don't think something's going to happen.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, on Fofana himself, Rob, do you see that if the deal does happen, that's the sort of, it's the right kind of signing for Chelsea to make? Do you think it makes a vast improvement, in that back line? Obviously, the likes of Azpilicueta, Thiago Silva, even Koulibaly to a certain extent, in their 30s. Koulibaly's got a bit longer, but the likes of Azpilicueta and Thiago Silva not got as long left. Chelsea, Tuchel himself has openly said that, we need to, bring the kind of the next generation through. So you like to see your Chalobahs, Fofana would be part of that, Cucurella, etc., who could slot in at a left centre back if necessary. Do you think this would be a good signing for Chelsea? Kind of ticks all the boxes. I think it's one that definitely excites me. It is a lot of money if it does happen, but you're looking at someone that could potentially be here for the next 10 years if he wanted to be.
I think that's exactly it, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot of money, but nowadays you pay for quality, you pay for what it is on the market. I think Chelsea have something of a rod for their own back in this situation, in that everyone knows they need centre-backs. But at the same time, I think if you're bringing in somebody who potentially, can be your centre-back for the next 5 years, for the next decade, you look at it and you say, well, 80 million sounds a lot, but when you actually factor that out, that's maybe about £15 million a year. Would you pay less than that for a top young player? Probably not. Really, the argument probably you should ask, if you do debate one, is why weren't they in there earlier and agreeing a deal for the player before they moved on and opening that pathway? And this is partly one of the other issues where, there's more of a sort of pathway that is required to be shown. And it's showing that pathway is sort of the real big issue.
Yeah, no, for sure. And in terms of kind of the centre-back targets, Rob, it's very much for Chelsea, would it be, this literally is all the eggs in the Fofana basket now, it's Fofana or bust really. Are there any other kind of viable options out there? Because, we've tried Kimpembe, prefers to stay at PSG, Skriniar probably favours a move to PSG over Chelsea potentially. You look at other names, we've missed out on Koundé, the link's gone to Bayern Munich. Nathan Ake was obviously too expensive, weren't prepared to meet the price that City wanted for him. I mean, if this Fofana deal, for whatever reason, can't get done, are there other alternatives out there that Chelsea are interested in? I mean, even Gvardiol, not really possible. I mean, it's very much this kind of, for Chelsea, this needs to happen, doesn't it?
There will be other names that they are looking at internally. I mean, Fofana, as I sort of said, Fofana is someone who's who was very high on the list earlier in the year, and I suspect you might have heard more of it if he hadn't signed that new deal earlier. Again, it's one of those situations where I think there will be other names on there, but because Chelsea is so focused on Fofana at the moment, they want to try and get that done. One thing I will say that's become quite clear with the new ownership, from what I've been told and certainly what you've sort of seen, is that when they get focused on a deal, they do look to, see it through to the conclusion, either whether it's the deal being done, the player going elsewhere, or, the deal being completely dead in the water. They don't tend to sort of give up on deals very, very easily.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, just before, just briefly going away from defence, a couple of things in the chat. Is there any truth in that at all, Rob? Interest in Lucas Paqueta?
Not anything to my knowledge, but it is possible. I mean, they've scouted players at Lyon before. Chelsea had players had a scout almost all season last year at Lyon, keeping an eye on what Emerson was up to. Again, the club scout hundreds of players every single year, so that's not really too much of a sort of thing to glean.
No, for sure. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, staying with defence, obviously Cucurella's come in. That's great. It solves the backup left wing back issue. Provides cover at left centre back as well. Fantastic signing. Thought it looked really promising on his debut. Obviously, the other side, right wing back. So obviously got Reece James, phenomenal player. Again, has had injury issues a lot last season. There's a lot of games this season. We're going to need cover/competition for him. Other than Denzel Dumfries, there's not really been a lot of other names out there linked to the kind of the backup slash competition for Reece James on that right-hand side. I mean, on the Dumfries still, it's gone a little bit quiet. I mean, is there any updates on that? Or are you hearing any other names that are potentially in that right wing-back conversation?
I mean, Chelsea's big issue with the right wing-back conversation is sort of twofold. Number one, there's a need to spend the budget, I think, elsewhere this summer. Number two is also that they're aware they've got the buyback clause on Tino Livramento, and Chelsea are aware that if they spend the money on bringing in, say, proper right wing back competition, then it means that Livramento won't come back. Livramento left the club because there wasn't a clear pathway, and I think realistically, if the club could say to him that, you know, there's Reece James at right wing back, but the rest of it is competition, you know, it's up to you and James to seize it, or for the right back spot, it's up to you and James to fight for it. Indeed, James in the longer term, the club would like to move him into the midfield and do, you know, envisage him moving into the midfield at some point. It's the sort of thing I think something could be possible. But at the same time, unless the club go ahead and make something happen, it sort of makes it unlikely at this moment in time if the club do proceed with it until A, he's recovered from his ACL, and B, if another right wing back comes in. Now, the club do like Denzel Dumfries, but again, not at the cost Inter Milan want. Inter Milan are effectively sort of pricing him out of the move at this moment in time. And also, Kyle Walker-Peters has been considered. He's English, he's homegrown. He is quite versatile. He can play on the left as well. But I think with Azpilicueta renewing, it probably means that right wing back has maybe been pushed back down the pecking order for, say, another year. Someone else also mentioned there is Dion Rankin, who impressed yesterday for the under-23s. You know, he will be hoping that he might get a chance. There is Hudson-Odoi and Loftus-Cheek, who've both covered in that position at times. I think it'd be surprising if Chelsea brought a right wing back in, because if they do, it's going to require them moving players out, and I think there's more higher priorities that they want to sort of focus on. I think the big priority at this moment in time, depending on who you speak to with the club, is it's either centre-back and then also a sort of attacking player, or centre-back and a midfielder.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, there's just one thing here, Rob. Is there any truth in this? Nottingham Forest looking at Emerson, obviously probably surplus to requirements.
I saw it today in a report by Nazar Kinsella. The only side I know that made an offer for Emerson was Lazio made an offer to buy for him. But I think that, you know, it certainly is a case that unless it happens, unless the bid comes in and, you know, Nottingham Forest put the money down, I think he'd rather go elsewhere.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, yeah, it's good that obviously Malang Sarr's been moved out, gone to Monaco with an option to buy based on appearances. Good business there. Marcos Alonso obviously moving out of the club as well to Barcelona for around 10 million euros. So Chelsea are trimming that squad down and getting some money back in, which is good news. Obviously, Fofana hopefully gets done. Again, that's going to drag on a little bit. And then obviously a right wing back, probably maybe not as much of a priority now as it was. I mean, I and a lot of fans would like to see it addressed, but there's not a bottomless pit of money this summer. And if Fofana comes in, that's taken the spending to, you know, well over £200 million. So, you know, you can't.
I would point out on the finance situation, there was a very good article done the other day by Kieran Maguire, or by Simon Johnson on The Athletic that featured Kieran Maguire. And I recommend people go read that if you want to, because financially Chelsea could afford to spend a lot this summer. It would mean that they need to be more lean next year, but you know, financially, from a point of view, Chelsea don't need to worry about anything with FFP. They don't need to worry about incomings or sort of, you know, balancing the books as per se. They could afford to do a lot because of they've, you know, been relatively lean during the years that COVID have happened. There is the COVID allowances that are given to all clubs, and also the fact that Chelsea have made over sort of £400 million in sales in the 5 years prior, over financial fair play reasons. They wouldn't have a problem. You know, if they did end up spending 350 million in this window.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, moving away from the defence, Rob, before we come on to kind of potential attacking incomings, obviously Timo Werner's moved on. I think it's, you know, good deal for both parties. Yes, okay. You know, we've not got as much money back as we thought, but Werner's got his move back to Germany. I think it's, you know, the best outcome all round there. Another player that is probably on the move, believed to be a loan, but a permanent deal wouldn't be totally out of the question. That's Callum Hudson-Odoi. I mean, I think Sky Sports reporting last night that up to 20 clubs could be interested. I mean, Southampton and Leicester in the Premier League, amongst others, Juventus, Borussia Dortmund as well. Callum's still only 21 years of age. There's a lot of potential there. I'm a big fan of his. You know, I think there's real talent there. It's just about unleashing it and getting into form on a consistent basis. I think, personally, he needs to go and play somewhere where he's going to play 20 to 30 games a season as a winger and push his game on. I think a move to Dortmund would be fantastic. But Rob, as far as you're concerned, Hudson-Odoi, I feel a bit sorry for him in a kind of a way because, he's injured at the back end of last season with that Achilles problem again, sort of resurfacing. Yeah. He's worked really hard in the off season. He's bulked up in the gym. He's been training. He's been back early with the academy boys as well. Not had a great pre-season, but then to not be in the squad at all for Goodison despite travelling, probably a bit of a kick in the teeth for him. Do you think a loan move is the best situation now for him? He's still 21. There's still time for him to go away and come back and still have an opportunity to succeed at Chelsea.
It's really difficult because, I think with Hudson-Odoi, when he came in, he was so exciting and he looked so direct and he looked so, so dynamic and bombastic. And he offered something that, we didn't really have at the time in that real direct, fearless running. And I think ever since the injury, he's never really done that. He's not returned to his old direct style. He doesn't really take players on anymore. He doesn't go inside and try and be direct. He tries to look for the safe option, passing back to the central midfield or passing back to the defence, passing it onto the wing back far too often. I almost think a loan might be better for him from his personal POV, just to go out and play regular minutes and just to go out and get game time, because I think he needs that game time. He needs to be playing week in, week out. It's not benefiting him to play a few minutes off the bench. It's not benefiting him to, play a right wing back if he wants to be a left winger. Certainly the club aren't against sending him on loan. They aren't against making something happen, but it's sort of quite clear, I think, that it's, Tuchel obviously is happy to let him go. I think it's worth making that known. Tuchel was happy to let him go. He rejected moves from last year, but this summer, it's different. I did say back at the beginning of the summer, and I still stand for this, it wouldn't be a surprise if, 3 or 4 members of the Chelsea's attack all left. Werner's obviously gone. I think Hudson-Odoi will go. I still think Ziyech will go. Pulisic would like to go, although I think he's most likely to end up staying at the moment just because there's not a suitor that's going to pay the money for him and he's on not insignificant wages. But Chelsea want to refresh that attack. They want to shuffle it. They brought Sterling in. There are other names they're sort of looking at. They effectively view Broja as coming back in as being another one of those attackers at this moment in time. And, they're not planning on selling him unless they get an extraordinary high bid or unless he really forces the issue. So I think, Hudson-Odoi will be keen on trying to go.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's for the best, really. And again, and that does free up sort of another space in the squad, I suppose, for attacking options. Before I come on to Aubameyang, one in the chat here, any truth in any of these, Rob? Cody Gakpo or Martin Terrier to Chelsea?
Cody Gakpo, I don't know. Terrier, Chelsea have scouted sort of significantly and have scouted him for a long amount of time. He is available. Rennes would sell him for around 35 to 40 million euros. West Ham have interest in the player. Leeds have interest in him. Liverpool have scouted him. Tottenham have scouted him. It's a case, I think, if someone made a bid, Chelsea might throw their hat into the ring. But again, I've talked about this on other streams. There is a logjam at the moment in the attack, and until players move out and move out on permanent deals, ideally, they aren't going to look to bring loads of players in because otherwise the logjam is just going to get even worse next summer. I also think it's worth noting that there is Chukwuemeka, who's come in, is someone who the club do see potentially as someone who could play in off the forward and in off the forward line. He did do it a little bit at youth level. And he is someone who the club do rate very, very highly, hence why they plan on keeping him around with the senior side.
Yeah, no, for sure. And on those attacking targets, obviously Werner's moved out, so a replacement will need to come in there, you would expect. One that's been linked, before I come on to Aubameyang, I just want to touch on Wilfried Zaha. Obviously 29 years of age, Crystal Palace. I think he's coming into the last year of his contract now. I was seeing reports today he could be available for around £25 million. Now, how much interest is there from Chelsea? And is that kind of genuine interest or is that kind of just reports? I mean,
I've got to be sort of honest with this, that I don't necessarily know as much with Zaha as some of the other journalists, because Zaha was only told to me this morning and it was via one of my other sort of friends who sort of shared it. Now, I think it's important to sort of say that Zaha, certainly to my knowledge, is that someone who Chelsea would consider, but he's not anywhere near the top of the list. If he was cheap, it's possible they, might look to do something, but I don't think Crystal Palace will be keen on selling. I in terms of his contract, I think, Chelsea might look at that and might look to that to their advantage, but I think Palace are going to want a significant amount of money. Now, I did see someone reporting that he is in a situation where potentially Chelsea could maybe send Hudson-Odoi on loan to Palace and bring Zaha in, but I'm not necessarily sure that would suit Hudson-Odoi just being used as sort of a bit of a pawn effectively in that. And I think the club at the moment would be reluctant to sanction a permanent exit for Hudson-Odoi in case the loan went really well and suddenly he comes back as, you know, a £60 million winger next season. If not, just then sell him on for the high fee. Zaha had issues when he was at Manchester United initially and struggled, you know, being at a bigger club. It perhaps suits him more to be a big fish in a proverbial smaller pond. And although he's very, very direct, I'm not necessarily sure he's someone I absolutely look at and think, yes, that's a Tuchel sort of player.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's one of those for me. There are pluses, you know, Premier League proven, obviously, you know, relatively cheap as well. That's obviously going to be a plus, given Chelsea probably aren't going to be able to spend that much money on a forward player. Kind of direct, posts good numbers for Palace or a mid-table side, but I'm not sure for me if it really moves the needle in the right direction in kind of making Chelsea's attack any better than it currently is. I'm not so sure. I wouldn't be dead against it, but I don't think it's kind of what Chelsea need. But moving on, Rob, to other targets. Couple from Barcelona now. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, obviously got a working relationship with Thomas Tuchel from the time at Dortmund. He's a good goal scorer. You know, Arsenal, you know, a couple golden boots. He won, I think, one or two. Scored a lot of goals at Dortmund. He has scored goals wherever he goes. Barcelona bought a lot of forward players in now. Obviously, Lewandowski coming in this summer probably pushes Aubameyang down the pecking order a little bit more. I think Matt Law, an article last night saying that Chelsea are going to be finding out sort of within the next week how possible a deal is for Aubameyang. And obviously the future of Memphis Depay very much then depends on what happens with Aubameyang. If Aubameyang stays, and I suppose they'll be more likely to let Memphis Depay go. But from what you're hearing, Rob, what you potentially understand yourself, is a move for Aubameyang, is that genuine for Chelsea? Is that something they're seriously considering?
Chelsea do really like Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. They do have a lot of interest in the player, mainly driven by Thomas Tuchel. And if Tuchel had his way, he would have been approached in January. You know, if Tuchel had his way, Lukaku would have gone in January and Aubameyang would have come in. It's difficult. He is a very, very good goal scorer. However, he will be on significant wages. He is no spring chicken, and there have been issues with him off the pitch before. Now, Tuchel very much does get on very well with Aubameyang. And Aubameyang, you know, was very clear to make it known that, you know, he would like a reunion with Tuchel if it was possible. Indeed, Tuchel did consider it when he was at Paris Saint-Germain. However, I think it's something that is, if it happens, it's very much an example, and you can very clearly say the board are 100% back in Tuchel and putting the eggs in Tuchel's basket and saying, you know, you can have the players you want. Because certainly I think the club would rather look at younger signings. The real profile for the club this summer has been either very, very good young players who they can't really afford to turn down. And I think, you know, I include Fofana in this if he does come, or players that are approaching their peak or in their peak. Or, you know, either, you know, in terms of Sterling, I think he's just coming into it. Koulibaly's probably at the very end of that peak, or sort of in the midst of it to the end of the peak. And it's coming in to be players that aren't necessarily going to spend a lot of time developing. They aren't going to need time to adapt. They're ready to come in now and be, you know, that ready-made sort of option. And again, I include Cucurella in that as well. So I wouldn't say he's 24, I think now 25. He's not really young as per se, but he's just about to start coming into sort of that peak period in his career. And you're about to start seeing the best football from him. Now, with Aubameyang, the argument is when he was last in the Premier League, he wasn't really ripping up trees and, you know, he looked a bit over the hill. However, Arsenal did give him that enormous contract and he did obviously fall out with Mikel Arteta. And, I mean, we're yet to see exactly, you know, the bits of it in the documentary. I'm curious to see exactly what about Aubameyang is and isn't put in the documentary because very much Arsenal were happy to put the blame on Aubameyang completely. But I'm always, you know, of the knowledge that when a player does decide to leave a club and when a relationship breaks down, it's always a two-way thing. It's never just the player. Something does always lead to it. So I'm not 100% against Aubameyang, but I think there are better solutions that could be found. That said, at this moment in time, if you need a short-term goal-scoring solution, he certainly would guarantee you goals.
Yeah, I mean, and would that be, if Chelsea do get Aubameyang, is that likely to be a permanent transfer or is that likely to be a loan? Because I've heard kind of both being reported, a loan could be a possibility as well. Do you mean, I don't know if a loan really makes sense or not. I mean, I suppose given that he's in his 32 years of age, I think possibly 33, I mean, it would be a short-term contract anyway. So I guess, I don't know, but could you see it being a loan or would you envisage it to very much be a permanent deal, say like maybe a 1+1 contract, something like that?
I don't think Barcelona would deal with a loan. I don't think they'd accept any sort of loan deal. I think you'd probably look at maybe a 2-year contract. Chelsea would be the sort of thing they'd go for. but it sort of is one of those sort of things where I'd still be surprised if it happens. Barcelona are more interested in trying to get Memphis Depay out, and Depay has more suitors than Aubameyang. I suppose the caveat that you might have is that Aubameyang is someone who they would want a fee for, and they could potentially get a fee for. With Depay wants to leave on a free transfer, and Barcelona are sort of willing to grant the request as long as they know where he's going and what team he's going to, so they can manipulate some things behind the scenes.
I mean, is there any interest from Chelsea in Memphis Depay? Because, I mean, personally, I probably prefer Memphis Depay over Aubameyang, just kind of a little bit younger, a bit more versatile as a player. I think he might fit a little bit better. People might disagree with that. But is there any interest in Depay on Chelsea's behalf?
There's maybe tentative interest. He's been offered to the club a lot, but it's not something that, has been really sort of clear. It's not something that has been sort of, really explored. I mean, obviously, if Depay was suddenly made available on a free transfer, the club might consider it a bit more because they have freed up wages from Timo Werner going. But yeah, I think it's something that at this moment in time there's nothing really in it. Just on the point of Timo Werner, actually, I want to say that and I've said this to a few people now, if work rate and attitude had been matched by his finishing and his technical ability, he'd have scored 30 a season. I've got nothing bad I can say about the guy. And, it's one of those things. I appreciate it was frustrating when he missed chances. I'm not pretending I didn't get frustrated by it. But ultimately, you can tell he didn't like it either. He came in, I think he leaves a record about 21 goals and 23 assists in 83 odd games, which isn't bad at all for an attacker, especially considering we talk about someone who didn't hit anywhere near his best. He ultimately won the Champions League with us. He'll always, be able to sort of hold that in his locker. And I really hope he goes back well and does well in Germany, because I never like seeing a player struggle unless they really burn the bridges. With people like Lukaku, where Lukaku just completely disrespected the fans, then I've got absolutely no sympathy whatsoever. They can struggle for the rest of their career. But in terms of Werner did absolutely nothing wrong, put absolute 100% effort in, and I can't fault a player for that. At the end of the day, if it doesn't work out or they're just not good enough, that's that's one of those things. The same with Malang Sarr when Malang Sarr goes. If it doesn't work out, it's just not good enough. At the end of the day, I wish them the best. I hope they go on and do well for the rest of their career. And ultimately, it's one of the signs the club needs to do. Sort of need to maybe be a bit more diligent when they're scouting players.
Yeah, no, 100%. I completely agree with that. I mean, obviously we've discussed Aubameyang, we've discussed obviously Wilf Zaha potentially, obviously as well Memphis Depay maybe. I mean, are there any other names on the list, Rob, that we could potentially look out for in terms of attacking incomings, or is it very much kind of the main ones that have already been reported?
There's a couple of names, but I need to investigate them a little bit more before I'm prepared to put them out. But certainly the club have levels of interest in, or rather, have had levels of interest in Leroy Sané, but I don't think that'll happen this window. He's too expensive, and Bayern aren't that keen on selling unless someone really pays over the odds. Anthony at Ajax, but again, it's a similar situation. Endrick Felipe, he's just a kid, but the club are trying very, very hard to get something done because they feel that could be the new Neymar moment. And again, there are still rankling at Chelsea that they missed out on Neymar due to the fact that they wouldn't meet his parents' agent fees at the time. And indeed, the club got very, very close to signing him. Interested in Nkunku is there, but again, nothing will manifest this summer. A couple of the names that aren't my personal choices, but are people who the club have looked at and so can't fully be discounted. Adama Traore is very well liked by Tuchel, and he is someone else who can play at wing back. One player I do really like is Jared Bowen, but again, West Ham I don't think will, unless an astronomical bid comes in, they won't be willing to sell. The one that I think maybe they might look at from Crystal Palace is Mikel Elise, because there is this rumours about this contract release clause. But again, until that's been verified and founded, I don't think anyone will really touch it. And Crystal Palace really aren't keen on selling. I will say I do think with Werner going, Chelsea will bring in at least one attacker. And I think if Hudson-Odoi does go and potentially also Ziyech does go, then I think they'll also look to bring in another one. But again, it's getting to a point now where the club don't want to be doing too much more because they want to start settling the squad. And there's also people like Harvey Vale, Omari Hutchinson at the moment to consider.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I've got to ask this, Rob. Obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo, I know Tuchel kind of ruled it out and it's gone a little bit quiet. Is there any chance that this could potentially be revisited later in the window if Chelsea are still kind of a little bit desperate in the attacking department, or is that completely dead and buried now?
I would be very, very surprised. I was told by someone that, it was only really likely to be a thing and likely to happen if the situation became thus that that Chelsea really struggled at the start of the season. Certainly Tuchel wants an experienced striker, and that's why he wants Aubameyang. But I'm told, Ronaldo is just seen as a little bit of a bridge too far. Certainly the owners have had discussions about him, and they've met the agent. They have had very tentative debates about his availability. Certainly his agent views him as available. But Manchester United are still sticking to their guns. They're saying he's not available and they won't sell him. And I think the fact that their Arnautovic talks have now broken down, which, probably is a good thing in all honesty, because the guy is not the best professional both on and off the pitch, shall we say. I think, now that has broken down, it means that they're less likely to let Ronaldo go. They were really keen on bringing in Benjamin Sesko, and if they'd have got Sesko in, they might have considered it. But I think now that they haven't got Sesko in, now that he's gone to RB Leipzig, then I think it's probably sort of dead in the water.
Yeah, I mean, just on Sesko briefly, Rob, how genuine was Chelsea's interest? Because I believe there were reports saying that Bowley kind of met with his agents and stuff. Was that kind of just kind of sounding out? Was there any genuine interest from Chelsea?
Oh, yeah, there was genuine interest from Chelsea, as there was from most of the rest of Europe. It's just the fact it became very, very clear quite quickly that a permanent deal wasn't going to happen this summer. Now, a couple of clubs, including Chelsea, did explore sounding out a deal that would see him stay for 1 year at Salzburg and then come next season. But at the same time, there was a feeling internally from Chelsea's perspective that they've got Armando Broja, who isn't that much older than Sesko, is a similar profile to Benjamin Sesko. And, is it really worth spending, say, 40 million on them buying Broja Mark II when you've already got the player? Now, obviously, if Sesko does end up going to Dortmund and, in a few years' time is being sold for 100 million, maybe you have that conversation again. But ultimately, there's that opportunity cost that the club had to consider. And also the fact that Sesko, I think, again, it's very rare that players within the Red Bull setup, young players, leave the Red Bull setup until Red Bull want them to leave the setup. And that's why Haaland's move to Dortmund was a bit of a surprise. And again, mainly manufactured by Mino Raiola, who worked on his own agenda. And, whatever you thought of the matter, the sort of late agent, whatever you thought of him, he did ultimately work to his own agenda and didn't kowtow to whatever clubs or indeed conglomerates wanted. But I think it's certainly worth noting that RB Leipzig, wanted Sesko, and they work on the basis that they're bringing Sesko. They brought Werner in. They're bringing Sesko in next summer. That will compensate for Nkunku leaving next summer.
Yeah, no, for sure. That pretty much covers off all the attacking stuff. Rob, the main one then, doing the rounds in the chat and kind of doing the rounds in general, Frenkie de Jong. Obviously, Manchester United have been pursuing him pretty much all summer. He's having kind of contract difficulties with Barcelona. Laporta coming out saying, the contract he signed wasn't legal. He wants them to go back to the old terms he was on. They owe him a lot of money, etc. He's not keen on Manchester United move. If he was to leave, I still believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that his preference is to stay at Barcelona if he can, but he would be open to a move to Chelsea, Champions League football, London, etc., all that. Yeah. What can you bring us on the latest on Frenkie de Jong? And is a move to Chelsea, is that getting more likely, or is that still quite unlikely as far as you see it?
It's certainly more likely than it was, although I don't think anything is absolutely imminent at this moment in time. De Jong is starting to accept that he needs to move on and that there needs to be a situation where he accepts he sort of moves on from Barcelona. There's been a talk with Todd Bowley last week where he said he wanted to stay, but, he was impressed by the proposal Chelsea put forward. And, he said, I'm flattered, but I want to stay. But at the same time, his mind has started to change a little bit over the last weekend. Now, obviously, the Barcelona contract stuff all coming out. I do feel that's a little bit of a power play from Barcelona. Again, this isn't new news, as per se. It did actually happen about a month ago when they accepted the bid first from Manchester United. Now, I think it is worth sort of noting that it is pretty clear that he would ideally like to stay at Barcelona in his ideal situation for two reasons. Number one, he's very settled in Barcelona along with his wife. Number two, he finally feels Barcelona are getting a good enough squad to be able to, benefit him as a player. De Jong was always sold on Barcelona under the impression they were going to continue significant recruitment and significant investiture. And obviously that hasn't what happened over the last few years. Now, obviously the economic levers have all been pulled this summer. I think we're all bored of hearing the word economic lever. I think before this summer we'd never heard of it. And after this summer, quite frankly, I'd be happy never to hear it ever again. But it's becoming quite clear that Barcelona are looking for a situation where if they can sell De Jong for a lot of money, they will. Now, I understand our good friend Gerrard has come out and said that, things will heat up more. Now, I personally was told last week that people thought, the De Jong situation would come to a head this week, in that one of three outcomes will either end up happening. Number one, he'd end up staying at Barcelona, signing a brand new deal and reducing his salary significantly. Number two, he'll end up signing for Chelsea. Number three, he'll end up going to court against Barcelona because they'll compete about this old contract. Now, interestingly, I did talk to someone about the Bruno's contract law, and certainly from an English perspective, if the contract was deemed null and void, Frenkie de Jong would immediately become a free agent rather than reverting to his old contract, because there's no legal precedent to say that you revert to your old contract after a new contract is signed. It'd be a bit like, just to give people an example, it'd be a bit like if you took a raise at work and then suddenly 6 months ago at work they said, actually, we need to remove your raise, you need to go back to your old salary. That would breach employment law. Now, whether or not this is the same in Spanish football, I don't know. I don't know enough about the Spanish football laws. But certainly from Chelsea's perspective, there was an increasing confidence. Now, Chelsea have made it very, very clear they will pay the money for Frenkie de Jong. There's no doubt they will pay the money that's required for it, the transfer fee. And also, they have said they will facilitate an offer to sort out the wage issue if they need to sort the wage issue out. Now, I think it's worth sort of noting that the wage issue is more something that the club don't really want to, be liable for on Chelsea's perspective, and indeed on Manchester United. But they were looking for solutions where maybe they paid a little bit of it to the player, and then after that, they subsequently, the rest of it was tied up in bonuses.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, in terms of De Jong coming in, obviously, there's probably going to be one that goes on for another couple of weeks or so. But Rob, would you say that kind of, it adds the right sort of profile that Chelsea are looking for to add something different to the midfield? Obviously, Declan Rice is the name that's always mentioned. That's gone very quiet this summer. I mean, does the fact that Chelsea are prepared to spend this much potentially on Frenkie de Jong, does that mean there's not the interest in Rice is cooled, or is it, is De Jong, would De Jong be as well as Rice maybe next summer, or is it viewed as an alternative to Rice? I mean, how would you see De Jong kind of complementing what Chelsea already have in midfield?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I think that it's worth sort of saying that De Jong is a very, very good player. I haven't seen enough of Frenkie de Jong on a regular basis. I've only seen him in Champions League sort of games and occasionally for Holland. So I do refrain from judging a player before I've watched them at least 20 to 30 times. Because I think, ultimately you could watch one game of one player. For example, you could watch Lukaku's game last year against Aston Villa at home, and you could conclude that, he's the greatest centre forward and he's the solution for what Chelsea needed. Alternatively, you could watch that game against Crystal Palace with Lukaku and conclude that, it's just sort of a big, basically you could have a lamppost up front and it would be as effective. So I do tend to try and refrain from doing it on just one-off occasions. Certainly De Jong is very, very good at what he does, although I do happen to feel personally that he is a bit similar to Mateo Kovacic. That said, he does have, an impressive profile in the midfield, and he is the sort of guy that does have the ability to pick passes and sort of knit the play together. Now, I think if De Jong did come in, you'd probably be looking at one of the current midfielders moving on. I think Jorginho is the one who'd be most likely to move on, as there is long-term interest in Juventus. But again, the player is settled in England, and it would probably take, De Jong coming in and a firm offer coming in for anything to be forced.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, just on the midfield, Robert, obviously it is very congested in there, as we know. De Jong's not arrived yet, but even just currently, as we're chatting, you've obviously got Kante, Jorginho, Kovacic. You've got Loftus-Cheek in there. You've got Conor Gallagher in there as well. I mean, on Conor Gallagher, obviously we saw him get a couple of minutes in stoppage time at the end against Everton. Is there potential for him to move away from the club, or is he very much part of the plans for this coming season? Because I feel that if a De Jong would come in, that pushes Conor Gallagher again further down the pecking order and reduces his chance of getting minutes. I mean, do you think if De Jong were to come in, that's kind of means that Gallagher's future's up in the air, or do you think he's got a future regardless at Chelsea?
I think the club will want to show the pathway to Gallagher this season. Certainly Gallagher's had offers already from A, return to Crystal Palace on a permanent deal, but B, also offers from West Ham and Newcastle on loan. And he's flat out turned them all down as he wants to make it at Chelsea. He's very keen on that. Now, obviously, if Chelsea go ahead and sign De Jong, they keep Jorginho and Kante and they can't move other players on, then maybe that conversation changes at the end of the window. But I think the other thing a lot of people are forgetting this year is there is also the 5 substitutes and also the more congested nature of the schedule means that there is going to need to be a lot more rotation, a lot more management of minutes. And I think Gallagher's sort of banking on that. Certainly from Gallagher's perspective, he's been very steadfast. He wants to make it at Chelsea. And Thomas Tuchel really likes the player. So I think they're more likely to try and want to move on Loftus-Cheek or potentially move on Jorginho before they move on Conor Gallagher.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. And on another midfield, well, sort of midfield player, reports coming out today, Rob, Ethan Ampadu, is he going out on loan? Chelsea prepared to sanction a season-long loan for him?
Yeah, so Ampadu's a bit of an interesting one. It's been up in the air a little bit. And the club were originally happy to move him on permanently, but now they seem to have changed tack to wanting to try and loan him out again. Now, I'm a little bit surprised he's not sticking around. And I have to say, if they've sanctioned a deal for Ampadu, then it means that I think either he has asked for it directly or they think they're a lot closer to bringing in another centre-back, because otherwise it leaves us light at the back with Malang Sarr's deal at Monaco, I believe, just ready to be announced, and other bits and pieces sort of going on in the background. Obviously, Azpilicueta has renewed, but even still, there's then only Azpilicueta, Thiago Silva, Kalidou Koulibaly, Chalobah, and Cucurella, if you include him as the sort of options at centre-back. So I think, probably you'd expect at least one more to sort of, to be coming in. Now, Ampadu, I can kind of understand it from the player's point of view. He probably wants to go out and play regular minutes in order to guarantee his spot in that Welsh World Cup squad. However, I'm a little bit surprised Chelsea aren't trying to keep him around because he's so versatile and can play a lot of positions. That said, obviously the player's sort of point of view always has to come first. And if they want to go out and play regular minutes, you can't stop that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I agree. I am slightly surprised that he's not sticking about, particularly given that versatility. He can play wing-back, can play centre-back, can play holding midfield. You almost think he'd be kind of the perfect sort of squad player, but you can understand perhaps from his perspective, he sees Fofana potentially coming in. Yeah. That's another kind of blocking of the pathway as such. It's a World Cup year. He'll want minutes. You could sort of understand from his perspective if he would want to move on. But Rob, I want to round that with kind of Chelsea building for the future, as it were. We're not just, not just with the likes of Sterling, Koulibaly, Cucurella, etc. We're seeing Todd Boehly spends quite a lot of money on young players for the future. We've seen Gabriel Slonina come in from Chicago Fire, the young goalkeeper in the MLS. We've seen Carney Chukwuemeka come in from Aston Villa, for quite big money for someone that's relatively unproven, 12, 13 Premier League appearances, a lot of big potential there. We've obviously seen Amari Hutchinson come in from Arsenal as well. Are you surprised, Rob? This is a bit of a change of tack from Chelsea and under the new ownership. We're now sort of trying to sign the best up-and-coming players in England and in world football as well. I mean, how pleased are you to kind of see that from a Chelsea perspective, bringing in those youngsters?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly it's some impressive signings. I mean, Chukwuemeka, pound for pound, was one of the best young players in sort of youth football in the world in the last year. Certainly, I think, Chelsea were very keen to get that one over the line. As soon as they saw an opportunity, they sort of ran with that one quite quickly. Chukwuemeka has ripped Chelsea apart a couple of times at youth level. He's, also was integral in that England under-19 victory this summer. I think it's really quite clear that, on both sides, both the men and the women, Todd Boehly and Clearlake have come in with an intention to invest at all levels and invest not only in the first team, but also in the younger players. And that's why you've also seen people like Lucy Watson sign for the women's side, who, is an elite young English attacking talent, and she's going out on loan. But they've also made that commitment to bring in those players at that level as well. And I think that's where the interest in Cesare Casadei comes in. The club want to be in a situation where they're not really looking in a couple of years' time when contracts are expiring that they need to be going out and bringing ready-made replacements in. They want to have those players ready in that conveyor belt to slot straight into that system.
I mean, on Cesare Casadei, obviously young Inter Milan player, how close is a deal for him to being completed? I mean, I've seen things today that he could possibly cost about £12 million, and Inter would kind of be happy to accept that. Is a deal for him close?
I wouldn't necessarily say close. I think Chelsea made one offer for him that's been turned down, and Inter came back with two fees. They came back with one that they want the buyback clause included on, and one that they came back and said, this is a flat fee we'll sell him for as long as we have a sell-on clause. I think it's sort of worth noting that the club have looked at Casadei for quite some time. This is not just the Tuchel target. This is sort of a longer-term club target that they've been recommended. I think Neil Bass has been involved in the scouting of the player. But at the same time, I think, if Chelsea bring him in, I don't expect them to see him in the first team absolutely immediately. I think he's probably one for the future. Maybe he'd go back on loan to Italy for the year. But he is someone who the club, think is a real talent. That said, Inter Milan are willing to, get rid of him on a permanent deal. And that's partly because they haven't been able to get income in from other places. They thought they were going to sell Milan Skriniar for big money. They thought maybe they'd sell Denzel Dumfries for big money, but at the moment that hasn't happened. So they need to balance the books elsewhere from their spending. And indeed bringing Lukaku sort of back to the club, on significant wages, even with the wage cut, it's still quite significant. So Kassadai might end up being the sacrifice that they sort of make.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, just going back to Carney Chukwuemeka, obviously coming in, it's going to cost around £20 million in the end of the deal. 1 year left in his contract. I think 12, 13 Premier League appearances last season for Villa. Part of, obviously, that successful under-19s England side that won the Euros, along with the likes of Harvey Vale. Is he very much expected to, obviously he wasn't in the squad at all for the Everton game, is he very much expected to be part of the first team plans this season? Because, it's a lot of money to spend on someone to go and play in the development squad or the PL2 or whatever you want to refer to it to. Is he very much part of the plans for this season?
Yeah, very much so. I think Chukwuemeka's the player who's most likely to take the minutes that were and sort of occupy the role of someone like Barkley in the squad. The club have made it clear Barkley can go find himself out at home. Ideally, they'd like it to be a permanent new home for him. Chukwuemeka is someone who the club have looked at for a long, long time, and they tried to bring him in at youth level. It wasn't possible. Aston Villa did have a very high valuation on him, and Chelsea did agree to meet that, albeit it's about half of it up front and a lot of it tied to bonuses. But he is an incredibly highly rated player. He was someone who Dortmund were considering bringing in next summer to replace Jude Bellingham, as they're expected to sell Bellingham next summer. I'd be amazed if Chukwuemeka did end up going out on loan. It would require quite a lot, I think, to happen for him to be allowed to go out on loan. You saw the way that the club spoke about him and the fact, they were quite keen to emphasise that he had a first team shirt number. I think it's number 30, so it's not that far outside of, the first team numbers as per se. If you assume they probably got to about 31, 32. And, they've been very, very keen to stress that he's going to get minutes. I don't think he played last weekend and was involved last weekend due to the fact that he, come in quite late and it was sort of quite situational. But I understand he's been in training sort of this week with the senior side, and it's a case that, I think we will see plenty of this season.
And just on another young player, it's kind of come out, I suppose, today. Peterborough United centre-half Ronnie Edwards. Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest, I know absolutely nothing about him. Kind of the first time I've really heard of him. Promising young defender. Expect a deal to be concluded quite swiftly, or is that one going to be quite tough to do?
It's another one where, again, I'll give credit to both Adam Newson and also to Nathan Gissing, because I spoke to both of them about this in the last couple of weeks. And if either of them sort of see this again, we had various chats about Ronnie Edwards. Chelsea have had a lot of interest in a lot of the members of that under-19 winning squad. A lot of that winning squad, again, Matthew Cox, the goalkeeper, was actually originally on Chelsea's books before he left to Brentford. And a couple of the others were also on Chelsea's books before they left to go elsewhere. And Chelsea are determined to not let that happen again. Ronnie Edwards is viewed as one of those elite young defensive talents in a period of time at the moment where England don't necessarily have too many of them really coming through and really stepping up and shining a light, besides those that were previously in the Chelsea academy. Subsequently, it's sort of becoming a case where I think Chelsea would like to get something done. Peterborough's big thing is they'd like to get a loan back for the player and they'd like to get him back for the season. Barry Fry is a wily old fox at Peterborough and is the sort of guy that will want to get top dollar for all their young talent. He will know what he values him at and won't be afraid to, ensure that every club knows about people's interest in it. There was no surprise in an interview to the Peterborough Telegraph where he name-dropped us, he name-dropped Tottenham. He knows what he's doing and getting the best value for young talent. But I think Chelsea will continue exploring the situation. Whether they do something remains to be seen. They've also got people like Bashir Humphreys, who are very highly rated internally within the academy. But certainly there is real interest in Ronnie Edwards.
No, for sure. And last thing, I just wanted to quickly touch on the goalkeeping situation at Chelsea. Obviously, new contract expected for Edouard Mendy. I mean, I saw that apparently they're a little bit apart in their valuation of what he should be paid. It's easy to sort that. In terms of contract reports, I would ignore most of them at the moment. Most of it is just sort of stirring the pot. Yeah, and in terms of Kepa, Rob, obviously reportedly close to a loan to Napoli. That hasn't quite materialised. That, are you, from what you understand or know, are you still expecting Kepa to leave the club on a loan deal, or is there a chance that he could still be here when the window closes?
I still expect him to go if he gets the chance to go, but the deal with Napoli has reached a bit of an impasse because Napoli want Chelsea to pay him out of the wages. Chelsea don't necessarily want to pay all the wages. Kepa himself is potentially keen on going to Spain. Chelsea would like to have something where it ends up being a permanent deal at the end of it. So I think this one's going to rumble on a little bit. Certainly Chelsea do have some options if they want to go for a backup Goalkeeper, they could promote Bettinelli to number 2. They've got some very talented youngsters like Teddy Sharman Lowe, who are still around the club. Eddie Beach as well. And it's worth sort of, I think, noting that they've also got Slonina coming back in January. And I think he will probably go out on loan again, but it's possible he might come in and be, the de facto number 2, although it's probably better for him to get minutes this time. The other thing is Chelsea, there are a couple of older goalkeepers they've sort of looked at, including Alex McCarthy at Southampton, who, might make the move. I know Leicester are also keen on the player as they hunt for a new number 1 in set to replace Kasper Schmeichel. I think, Chelsea ideally wanted Nathan Baxter to come back and be number 2 this season. But unfortunately, Baxter wanted to go out and play regular minutes, and the club can't, block that. They've sent him out on loan. There's an option to buy in the deal. It's quite a good deal for Chelsea, to be honest, overall, assuming, the criteria is sort of met. And it means that Baxter gets to go out and play. Now, what will be really interesting is to see if Chelsea don't get Kepa out of the situation, what ends up happening in January with Kepa, because I think he'll want to go in January, because if he doesn't go this summer, I think it means he'll have no chance getting into the Spain squad for the World Cup. And I don't think he'll want to miss another international tournament. So I think then in January, he might try and force the move a little bit more.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, that seems like a good place to round out. I mean, Rob, thank you so much for your time, mate. Really appreciate it. Got some great insight, great to chat all things Chelsea. If people want to, check out more of what you do, obviously Twitter, your handle's on the screen there. I've linked it in the description. Is there anywhere else people can go to find out, to sort of look at your work and stuff, or is Twitter kind of the main place?
Yes, there's a couple of places on Twitter. There's also at Side Dan Talks CFC. I write for Side Phillips' sort of podcast and for his sort of channel. Again, great bunch of guys. And then also at the Chelsea Social and at the CFCW Social. I partly run sort of both of those. And again, great sort of group of community, lots of great articles, lots of great edits and sort of content going out there on Chelsea and Chelsea women. So yeah, please do come check us out.
No, fantastic. Guys, make sure you drop Rob a follow on Twitter. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. Really appreciate it. Thanks for getting involved in the chat, guys. Enjoy interacting with you. On your way out, please make sure you smash a like on the stream and subscribe to the channel as well. If you're watching now and you're not subscribed, please just click that subscribe button. It really helps me out, helps the channel out, and would always appreciate all of your support. I should be back in the next couple of days or so with a preview to the Spurs game and any more transfer updates. But until then, guys, take care.